It's the fifth season. If you are from Louisiana, you know what I'm talking about. Let's get into it now. Roll it, Kirk. Well, if you live in Louisiana, this time of year always brings apprehension because you're concerned about what the next several weeks will bring to you here as a citizen. Let's talk about that now with Chief Meteorologist Jay Grimes. The fifth season documentary aired last evening, It talks about the hurricane season. And man, you know, weather is a big subject around here, especially this season.
Well, any season it is, and any time of the year it is. But as we roll into hurricane season, this is where people really start to sit up and take notice. And Clay, what we want to talk about today is just how active the experts are saying the season is going to be. This could be a near record or record season in terms of storm numbers.
Great.
You know,
all right, let's start with that. Tell me about it.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about it. And you see the graphic here. First of all, let's look at what the numbers are. On average, there will be 14 named storms historically in the Atlantic Basin, 7 of those as hurricanes. But what we want to focus on are those next 3 columns. The first column there, the blue with the yellow numbers, that's the NOAA's forecast. That's basically the experts from the Weather Service and the Hurricane Center. And you see from those numbers that they are quite frightening indeed. As many as 17 to maybe 25 named storms on the board there. And then as we work through hurricanes, we're talking about maybe a dozen hurricanes over the season and upwards of 4, maybe half a dozen major storms. Now that's just the NOAA guys. Then we get over to these other 2 columns and we're talking about non-NOAA professional forecast groups, including Colorado State. Now these guys are kind of the grandparents of the whole thing. They invented preseason forecasting back in the early to mid 80s. They've been doing it for 40 years. Check out these numbers. Essentially 24 named storms, a dozen hurricanes, and nearly half a dozen major hurricanes. So they compare favorably with the NOAA ranges. And then we look at some other groups here, and these numbers are just off the charts.
33?
University of Pennsylvania calling for 33 named storms. Now that's the highest number I could find, but what you get away, and you walk away from these numbers, what you end up seeing is that for each of these groups, these are the largest numbers they've ever issued for preseason forecasts. Now, the most storms we've ever seen in hurricane season is 30. You look at these numbers here, we're going to make a run at that 30 that occurred in 2020. By the way, I got to tell you, you are a snappy dresser.
Well, and I got to tell you, I'm devastated. So let's talk a little bit about this.
Let's do it.
People assume when we haven't had a hurricane here that we've had a quiet hurricane season. And you say that isn't true, but why?
Oh, well, that's of course not true, because just because Louisiana goes unscathed doesn't mean other places do. And for a great example, just last year, Idalia whacked Florida. We just got to sit back and watch. But we deserve a break. We've had 2 quiet years in a row. But you go back to 2020 and you had 4 landfalls in one season. Laura, Zeta, Delta. And in fact, what even makes that stranger still, Zeta and Delta, so we had to go to the Greek alphabet.
That's right.
And in fact, Zeta, kind of an off-the-wall kind of statistic, Zeta is the latest major hurricane to make landfall anywhere in the United States historically, and it happened to be here.
So this begs the obvious question. How do you know this? Like how, as a scientist and all of the experts who say this, how do you know?
Okay, first of all, we don't know.
Okay.
So what we're looking at is products that give us a sense of what is going on right now, and historically, how does that relate to storm numbers as we get into August, September, and October? Now, it's more than just guesswork here, but a lot of it is sort of analog comparisons. And there are a couple of models that do give us a little bit of a long-range hint as to how the atmosphere and the ocean might behave. And keep in mind, we're talking about 2 mediums here. It's the ocean working with the atmosphere that either creates or inhibits the potential for storms to develop. So we look back in history, and what we're seeing here are a number of factors that we're going to talk about here in a couple of minutes that are adding up to to collectively create these off-the-chart numbers.
I want to do that. So Alyssa, we're getting out early on this segment to come back for that, because I do want to talk about those factors. People are wondering about the heat. Last year was quite anomalous to this part of the country, and now it looks like we might repeat it. So we'll talk with Jay about the 5th season, find out what the situations are causing here. But look, let me tell you about this. Power Up. Oh, excuse me. No. The Pop-Up Barbecue. Let's do that one first. The Police Athletic League is hosting an event in Howell Park this weekend. It's free barbecue, mingling with law enforcement officers. Have a great time. You see what time it starts. It starts a little later in the day so you don't get burned up by the heat. That's the Pop-Up Barbecue by the Police Athletic League and the Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Foundation. Back with more Jay in just a moment. Well, next to recipes, weather is really at the top of the food chain as it relates to conversation in Louisiana. The 5th season documentary aired last evening. The Storm team here talked about this year's hurricane season, and we're chatting with Jay Grimes about it on this edition of the show.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to speak a little bit longer on these points.
Now, I want to go back to something. We talked about the number of storms in a season versus the number of storms that make landfall here. What's your perspective on that?
Well, as I get older, the number of storms that are forecast in a season, that's interesting stuff, but that's scientific voodoo in some ways.
Okay.
Because frankly, as I get older, the only number I want to know is what's the threat here.
Right.
You know, I mean, if there were 30 storms and they were all in the open Atlantic, I'm good with that.
Me too.
But here's the thing. On average, about 1 in 3 storms ends up either moving into the Gulf of Mexico or forms in the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay.
So if we take those numbers we just looked at and come up with sort of an average of what all those groups were talking, they're talking about roughly 24, 24 named storms.
Okay.
1/3 of that is upwards of 8. So that's what we're looking at here in terms of the Gulf. 5 to maybe 8 named storms in the Gulf.
Okay.
Now, it's like billiard balls on a pool table. Sooner or later, one of those is going to hit the Louisiana bumper. When you get this many, the chances of us going scot-free without a landfall this season is pretty low. In fact, Colorado State is telling us that there's about a 5 in 6 chance that a named storm will hit Louisiana. And there's almost a 1 in 4 chance that Louisiana could get hit by a major. And by the way, when we look back at the last 20 years, 6 of those last 20 years, we had multiple landfalls.
Yeah.
So we have really been in Mother Nature's crosshairs. And when I talk to people about what's the hurricane state, everybody says Florida, and that's true historically, but over the last 20 years, it's about neck and neck in terms of landfalls in Florida and landfalls in Louisiana. And the thing is, Florida's coastline is about 3 times longer.
That's right.
So our numbers for coastline length are actually the highest in the country right now.
Oh my goodness. You know, and we went into break talking about how hot it is and how hot the Gulf waters are. How does that contribute, or does it contribute to these numbers?
It does, and there's 3 reasons why we're looking at very active forecasts for the season. The number one is the phase of La Nina, the phase of ENSO actually in the Pacific Ocean. Now, here's where cool water matters. And so what I'm showing you here, get your bearings, there's South America. In the eastern and central equatorial Pacific, La Nina is characterized by this wedge of cooler than normal waters. Now, why is that important? Because remember, we talked about, when we're talking about tropics, we're talking about ocean and atmosphere. Change the signature of the ocean and you change the signature of the atmosphere sitting above it. Change the signature of the atmosphere here and it translates to the signature in the northern Pacific. And that energy ends up being moved out into the Atlantic. Now, typically in the Atlantic Ocean, we have over the ocean at tens of thousands of feet, we have these westerly winds. And they tend to be fairly permanent, fairly consistent, except when La Nina kicks in, and then these westerly winds at the upper levels flowing from west to east, they start to weaken. They become less permanent. And these are the winds that create the wind shear you hear weather people talking about. Wind shear is our friend because wind shear causes hurricanes to tilt. It limits the ability for hurricanes to strengthen and increase. But if these westerly winds become more ephemeral and become weaker in general, storms have the ability to build vertically, more of them can develop, and those that do develop can get even stronger. So there's number one. Here comes number two.
Oh, goodness.
And this has to do with the water temperatures you're talking about. So anywhere you see orange, red, or pinkish shades here, we're talking about water temperatures that are already good to go to fuel a storm. Remember, warm water is the fuel, the gasoline for hurricanes. As we look down here, and this is what we call the main development region, and what we're looking at here are the water temperatures compared to normal at this time of year. Anywhere you see the shades of orange or red, that's water that's warmer than normal for the end of May. Hey, how about this? Through the main development region, which accounts for about 70 or 80% of the formations of our systems, those waters are 3, 4, 5 degrees warmer than normal. We're not talking about gasoline here. We're talking about 93 at the pump instead of your normal 87. We're talking about high-test gasoline here, and that is a big reason why we're likely to see a bump up in numbers this coming season.
Oh, boy. So, Alyssa, we're getting out of this segment early to give more to the next one as well, because I got a question about this, and I don't want to start him on it when we don't have time to finish it before the commercial break. Talking about the 5th season, look, you can check it out online at WAFB.com, and also Peddling for Peace taking place this weekend. They've been doing this for a few years, as you can see, the 7th annual. This is put on by Councilman Lamont Cole, and we encourage you to get on out. We need all we can get. Back with more Jay in just a moment. So much great information about this upcoming hurricane season. You see these numbers that Jay gave us at the top of the show. You can see all of this in entirety in the 5th season series, a documentary that's up at WAFB.com right now. So I want to go back to this. You gave us these numbers to start. What stars have to align for us to end up in the bad end of the spectrum?
Well, we just showed you that we've got the ingredients are there.
Yeah.
Now, keep in mind, think of this as sort of climatology. What is the big picture? But when we're talking about tropical systems, we're really back to meteorology. So what we're saying is the environment is good to go. Now we've got to get the ingredients, those tropical storms, those precursors going. But in a typical season, we'll see 50, 60, maybe even 80 tropical waves. On average, 1 out of about 6 of those earns a name. We've got everything together for an active season.
How many, on average, how many invests or disturbances actually become names in a season? Is there a percentage?
There's a round number. Most of the invests become tropical depressions.
Okay.
And about 90% of the tropical depressions move on to become storms. So we do want to keep our eyes on the invests, particularly when they get to that level of 50% development chance or better. Now, what's going to happen this season, the National Hurricane Center is going to actually start forecasting invests or watching invests 7 days out. It used to be 5 days.
Okay.
Now, that 7 days means we're going to see a lot of 10 and 20%ers that never develop. So we want to kind of ease off on the throttle in terms of watching those invests.
Yeah.
But once those invests get to 80 or 90%, you're probably looking at something that has a real good chance of developing.
What about planning? I mean, this does sound an alarm that there is potentially an active season on the way. What planning advice would you give our viewers?
I want to tell you a couple of things. One, by the way, Colorado State, in the last 14 years, 10 of those 14 years, their forecast numbers were below what actually occurred. So we're actually looking at certainly a very, very active season, and all the ingredients are there. And as I said, all these guys are telling us these are the biggest numbers they've ever seen. So what we need people to do is just sit up and take notice. If you lived in or near the path of Ida, there's your yardstick for what you need to be prepared. Because remember, folks, awareness is the key to preparedness. And being over-prepared trumps being under-prepared every time. So yeah, you may invest some energy and some effort and some dollars that you don't really need to come the end of November. But if you were to need those kinds of things done, you're good to go. So we're talking about, first of all, evaluate your family. And when I talk about family, I'm not just talking about the kids and the spouse. For many of us, we're also the caretakers of the grandparents. Or we've adopted that elderly couple 2 doors down.
Correct.
So we're talking about your extended family. And you've got to think about, with each of those individuals, how long are they going to be comfortable without power.
Yeah.
Because you could be without power for a week or two. And in some instances, that's just too long. In fact, especially for people that have medical needs that require access to power. And I say this somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but it's even true for you and your spouse if you've got little kids. They're all used to electronics.
Right.
How many days can you go with them not being entertained and climbing the walls? You know, after day 3, you may say, Uncle. And the whole point of all this is evaluating and being honest with yourself. What are the chances that maybe this year you might have to leave? Most of us are going to ride it out at home, especially as you get this far inland to the Baton Rouge corridor. But especially for your viewers down closer to the coast, take stock now as to the potential that you may have to get out of Dodge. And if you decide you're going to be one of those people to leave, leave early.
Let's tell people who may not have seen the series and are going to go watch it now what they can expect if they watch the 5th season.
Okay, well, we're going to touch much. I'm going to open with much of the same stuff we did here, right here. And then we're also going to look at things like last year's drought. What did that do to the trees? And what's the likelihood that your backyard oak might be a jeopardy for you should the big winds come. We're also going to look at some of the new technology that's coming around. So there's plenty that we're going to cover, a little aspect on insurance. We've got a broad array of topics we're going to hit on. And Clay, again, I can't thank you for giving us the opportunity to expand on it right here.
Here is the graphic right here. And I told Jay during commercial that we'll even do after action if, God forbid, we have a hurricane this season. Man, you know, I said this to Steve before. The work that y'all do is so important to people because the weather impacts not just our personal lives here in Louisiana, but our professional lives. If you own a business, if you're trying to get to work, if a tree is obstructed on certain roads, you can't get to work, that has an impact on you. So, man, I do appreciate it, and I'm hoping you're wrong.
I'd like to be wrong. I want to be wrong.
Please, let's root for Jay to be wrong. All right, quickly here at the end of the show, I want to tell you about Power Up. It's a free health and safety event that's taking place on June 7th. There's a graphic on the screen. You can get car seat checks, giveaways, hearing and vision screenings. Look, Kona Ice is going to be out there as well. This is Power Up. Glad to be a part of it. Take advantage of it. We'll see you guys next week. So the Sneaker Ball is happening this weekend at L'Auberge in Baton Rouge. It is an amazing event. Look at this video.
Yeah.
The production value on this is so amazing. I had never heard of a Sneaker Ball before, and then my guest here, Darius Lannis, told me about the Sneaker Ball, and I went last year, and man,
Yes, sir.
Ball gowns,
Yes, sir.
and Air Jordans,
Yes, sir.
tuxedos, and Jordan 1s.
Yes, sir.
Wow.
It's a new day for culture in Baton Rouge.
It was everybody had a great time. I mean, executives from across the region were there for this. So let's talk a little bit about what people can expect if they're going to Sneaker Ball.
I think, well, first thing you said, Clay, is the most important thing. It's the intersectional professionalism that you see from people. This
Right.
is something we try to do for our young professionals. As you know, we do our 100 Black Men Gala every year, which is a standout event. And this is one that we also try to do to try to bring in more young people to the fold. But since we've been doing this is our 3rd annual event.
So this is the third
This
one.
is the
Okay.
third one.
I was telling Matt that I thought it was the second one. So it's the third
I
one.
mean,
Okay.
it's been growing. I want to say the first year we did about 400 people. The second year, 800 people, as you saw.
Yeah,
You said you made
yeah,
that last
yeah.
year. This year is going to be about the same thing. It's a great event. It's a great place to hold it at the L'Auberge Grand Ballroom, and it's just going to be phenomenal, man. We
Yeah.
ask everybody to make sure you should come prepared for a night of celebration.
So they're already in their dancing shoes because you're wearing sneakers anyway.
Yes.
And there were so many people there. Like I said, people, elected officials, business people, and people who move the city forward who are all there for this great event. And you see the video there with TJ doing this thing on stage, and there you were, man. It really is something big. Where did you hear about this concept?
Well, actually, it's one of our executive board members, Mr. Stan Savage, is our VP of Finance. He's from New Orleans, and New Orleans has a great cultural background, and that's one of the things that they did to also raise money. And he came up with the concept, and we put it all in motion. And since that time, it's just grown.
Yeah.
And, I want to say that within our first week, we may have sold half the tickets because it's just become that much big. Now it's a staple inside of our community. People look forward to doing this every year. And I've even seen people try to duplicate it. Now, I will say, we could be imitated.
Not duplicated.
There you go. There you go.
Somebody's trying to duplicate?
They tried to. It wasn't that successful. But, for us, it's not even about us doing it just to try to do a big event. It's about giving back to our mentees.
Yeah.
Every single dollar that we raise from the Sneaker Ball is donated to our kids or contributed to our kids as they go off to college, because we create scholarships from them. So all of our graduating seniors, that's what it's all about. It's making sure that we not only highlight them, but also show the work, the amazing impact that we have across the capital region.
Look, y'all go out to the Sneaker Ball and then gather together at Sky
That's
Baton
right.
Rouge afterwards.
That's
and that's
right.
where everything is going to end the night. Sky Baton Rouge right after the Sneaker Ball.
Yes.
So you wear a couple of hats. In addition to being
Yes.
the executive director
Yes.
of 100 Black Men of Metro Baton Rouge, you're also a school board member.
Yes.
Help me understand what y'all are doing with this budget.
It's an interesting budget right now. You know, I think right now it's in the first phase, you know, and as you go through budgets, I went through it last year. I served as the president of the board last year, and you go through different phases. I think around this time right here, we probably had about 3 different options of what we were going to go with. The option that we ultimately picked was mine, but as you know, as things change, as allocations change, both from the federal government as well as the state government, a lot of things can change. So we're going to have some conversations tonight. It's going to take place at Park Forest Middle School. And we're asking the whole community to come out, be a part of those conversations, be a part of the conversation, and let your voice be heard.
Well, as we're taping this, that's going to happen tonight. But by the time this airs, that will have already gone on. I just want to know how y'all will get that $2,700 reduction in teacher pay to fly.
What I can tell you is it's going to be some serious movement, but I'm
Like
not
movement of furniture.
Oh, absolutely. But what I will say is this. You know, last year we dealt with a $31 million budget shortfall. We got out of it. Not only did we come out of it, we were able to give in excess of $22 million to go towards pay increases for our employees. So while I am of the instance that, you know, yes, it's going to be, you know, a difficult conversation is going to be had. But the part that we're not talking about is that we have historically high reserves. So we could pull money out of reserves if we have to. So, you know, it's going to be some rethinking. There's going to be some recalibration. As you said before, we got to take some furniture and put it on side the road. But, you know, we
You better keep it standing room only. Darius Lannis, EBR Schools, 100 Black Men of Baton Rouge. Look, the Sneaker Ball's this weekend. If you're going, have a great time. And by the way, if you haven't seen it, go online, WAFB.com, to check out the 5th season special. Great work by the team here. Go check that out. Have a great weekend. We'll catch you next week.